thank you everyone for coming to this information session. My name is Lori Anderson, and I'm the PI for the Macrosystems Ecology for All Research Coordination Network. And you can see on my first slide here, I've got some other roles as well. I'm also president of the board of directors for the Ecological Research as Education Network. And I also work at Ohio Wesleyan University as a plant ecologist. And I'm basically here to tell you about this opportunity that we're publicizing through the MEFA network, and very glad that you could make it. So we will cover a quick little bit of Zoom etiquette that we'll be following. I'd like to ask that you keep yourself muted during the presentations and when not speaking, just so we don't have too much background noise. And if you could use the hand raise function to speak, since we have a small group, that's probably not completely necessary, but that can be helpful. We've enabled closed captioning if you wish to use it. And I also just want to remind everyone to use professional etiquette while on Zoom. We do follow the ARIN Code of Conduct, which begins with this statement: the Ecological Research as Education Network is dedicated to providing an inclusive and welcoming experience for everyone who engages with our organization, regardless of any aspect of their personal identity. So that's important to keep in mind. And just making sure I can advance my slides. There we go. I'd also like to read this brief excerpt from the Ohio Wesleyan Land Acknowledgement. Ohio Wesleyan University occupies land that was home to many Native nations seeking refuge from the colonialist expansion of the United States. Although the state has no federally recognized tribes or reservations, Central Ohio is now home to many people whose parents and grandparents were relocated away from reservations and into cities by the United States government in the 1950s and 60s. They include people from the Lakota, Cherokee, Navajo, Seneca, and other nations. Although this history is complex and little known, we believe that recognizing such truths are the first steps to creating more inclusive histories and more equitable relationships among people in this country. We'd also like you to feel invited to expand your knowledge about the history of Native Americans in our country by checking out these websites. What land do I live on? The Native Land website. What tribes are in my area? And there's also an interesting article on the practice of land acknowledgements that we think adds to this discussion. So now I'd like to talk about the Macrosystems Ecology for All Network. What is MEFA? The MEFA network supports faculty from all backgrounds in developing collaborative macrosystems ecology projects for research and teaching, with a focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. We're a spin-off of the Ecological Research as Education Network, or ARIN, and we're funded by the National Science Foundation, and our funding runs from 2022 through 2027. These are the goals of the network. We want to expand faculty training in macrosystems ecology, and our goal is to make sure that under-resourced faculty get access to training in macrosystems principles, data science, and existing environmental data sets. We also want to create a DEI-focused network, and we want to be accessible and inclusive for scientists and students from all backgrounds. We want to enable collaborative macrosystems research. So we want to focus on supporting collaborative cross-institution projects that are scientifically compelling, DEIJ-centered, and addressing macrosystems concepts. And finally, we're really interested in educating through these research projects. So we'd like to create models for teaching undergraduates macrosystems ecology and data science through engagement with our research projects. who is MEFA? I have a list of all the members of the network management team, and you can see that there are 9 of us who kind of make the network run. We also have a network advisory team that helps us with some of the big concepts that drive MEFA. And we also have 164 members in our community, and we'd like to invite you to join us if you haven't already. It's free to do so, and we have a QR code there if you'd like to connect with us in that way, if you're not already part of the network. So how do we work? The projects are really the focus of our activities. We provide training and networking in an inclusive community to support the creation of these collaborative macrosystems research projects. We call these MEFA projects. And an ideal MEFA project integrates these 5 concepts: macrosystems ecology. It makes use of existing environmental data sets and tools from data science. There is a DEIJ plan for collaboration to kind of guide the management of the project. It includes student learning through authentic research in some way. And it also integrates local community concerns if that is appropriate to your particular project. So I want to talk about each of these 5 components and just give a little overview about how we think about them. So first, let's talk about macrosystems ecology. What is this? These are some definitions and concepts we've gotten from an excellent paper by Heffernan et al., published in 2014. And Heffernan et al. Defines macrosystems ecology as the study of diverse ecological phenomena at the scale of regions to continents, and their interactions with phenomena at other scales. The sort of driver of macrosystems ecology is that understanding what happens across large scales is really needed, because these are the extents over which many environmental problems have both their causes and their consequences. So thinking at large scales is important, and we now have a lot of really compelling tools to do so. Cross-scale interactions are key because local mechanisms may underlie a broad-scale pattern, but we also have broad-scale processes constraining local ecology. So every scale is important and every scale is connected in macrosystems ecology. Here are some more specific components of macrosystems ecology that are also from Heffernan et al. So we have teleconnection, and this is strong links between widely separated regions. An example of a teleconnection might be nutrient transfers and dust storms that go from the African continent across the Atlantic Ocean into South American rainforests. We know that that transfer occurs, and it's a very large-scale teleconnection. Macroscale feedback, this is where one macroscale phenomena is affected by another. And a simple example of this might be that vegetation and precipitation affect each other and interact, and both happen at fairly large scales. Cross-scale interaction is where processes at one scale influence those at another scale. For example, local habitat loss affects how resilient a species metapopulation will be to climate change, because the loss of one subpopulation in that metapopulation may mean that the populations are no longer interconnected and can't share genes and migrate to support each other across their entire range. A cross-scale emergence is where an accumulation of local processes can shape a macrosystems pattern or process. And an example of this is that many local decisions about soil care and crop choice led to the US Dust Bowl in the 1930s. So those are some examples of things you are looking for and focusing on when you're doing macrosystems ecology. I have a couple of concrete examples. That's often the way that I understand things, is by applying it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Amazon rainforest macrosystem. And we'll start at a small scale where we think about individual plants transpiring water to the atmosphere. And collectively, their individual actions create abundant water vapor in the air over the Amazon rainforest. What that means is that local clearing of rainforest will reduce this evapotranspiration, and that means less clouds and less rain regionally if clearing continues. And this can drive the whole Amazon region toward drier savanna vegetation with major implications for global water and carbon balance. We also have some major teleconnections in the Amazon macrosystem. We have global economic drivers for beef and soy that is driving clearing in basically in the southern Amazon, and that is disrupting regional rainfall patterns, which disrupts the movement of water from the Amazon rainforest into southern South America. This is basically the flying river system that gets changed. And so we do actually see interactions across all the different scales within the Amazon macrosystem. We also have the garlic mustard macrosystem. This is work that emerged from an Aaron project and that we published in a recent review in Bioscience. The idea here is that we have a native forest invader, garlic mustard, Alaria petiolata, and a key trait of this invader is allelopathic effects on native mycorrhizal fungi. So it tends to suppress mycorrhizae, especially on local tree seedlings. But we've noticed that the invasion severity and the impacts of this allelopathy and other garlic mustard traits really varies across sites. And we're trying to understand why sites are so different in terms of how they respond to garlic mustard and how garlic mustard is affecting those sites. And there's a lot of different invasion drivers that it turns out operate and interact both within and across scales. So we argue in our paper that a macrosystems perspective may improve understanding of this particular invader. And we have this elaborate figure in our paper that shows all of the different kinds of cross-scale interactions that may be part of the garlic mustard macrosystem. One example is if you go from the larger scale factor of deer herbivory, we know that deer herbivory can affect the competition of garlic mustard with native plants because deer tend to eat native plants and reduce their abundance, which is going to affect, how they are available to interact with garlic mustard. We also have, of course, smaller scale interactions between garlic mustard and native plants because garlic mustard allelopathy is killing native plant mycorrhizae. So native plants are kind of getting hit by both the large scale deer herbivory and the local scale interaction with garlic mustard, which, can characterize, I guess, or affect the severity of invasion on the site. So just giving you another example of how macrosystems thinking might be helpful in this kind of scenario. So the next slide here says, sounds great. How do we do macrosystems ecology? And from Heffernan et al., once again, we have this emphasis on different kinds of data than we've used in the past in ecology. The integration across scales often requires data that span greater spatial and temporal extents than have traditionally been studied. So to do this, what we need to focus on is combining data from multiple local studies, collaborating across scales and disciplines, creating linked networks for data collection and collaborative experiments. And Aaron and MEFA are examples of these linked networks, along with NEON, NewtNet, FluxNet. A lot of different kinds of networks have emerged over the last 10 or 20 years. And then we also have some new data science tools that are available to us. documenting broad spatial and temporal patterns with remotely sensed data, and then integrating diverse existing data sets using all different kinds of tools, geospatial, mathematical, ecoinformatic, and computational. So data science, we think, is really key to macrosystems ecology, and we'd like to support projects that apply some tools from data science in order to achieve its goals. And we recognize that this may be kind of a new approach to science for some of us. For example, I was very much trained under the idea that you form a hypothesis, design an experiment, and then collect new data at one site in order to test your hypothesis, or maybe a handful of sites. In other words, when I came up through graduate school, I really wasn't thinking at these larger spatial scales. Also, we didn't really have huge amounts of existing data. But now we're in a situation where what if huge amounts of data about your question already exist? So you need to ask new kinds of questions like, well, what data are out there? How does existing data change the questions we ask and the hypotheses we test? How do we bring diverse data sets together? How can we pair existing data with new data we collect? And then can we do this with our undergraduate students? Because if you're like me working at a teaching college, you're really interested in not only using these new ways of viewing our existing data in your science, but also communicating that to your students so that they're ready to be part of the data science workforce. MEFA will provide some training and access to experts in data science. So you don't have to be already an expert in this area, but we invite everyone that participates in MEFA to kind of expand their horizons if this isn't something that you're used to thinking about. However, we'd like to add even more. We think that Heffernan et al. Has not gone quite far enough. So this is the same slide that I showed earlier, but we have some pluses down at the bottom where it says plus from MEFA. We want to make sure that our projects include more scientists and educators from every background. We want to focus on training the next generation because MEFA really does try to support faculty coming from teaching-oriented positions as well as faculty in research positions. And we also want to partner with communities where data are collected, if that is important and relevant to your project. So we are encouraging the formation of what we call a DEI plan. We all know that ecology needs to do better at welcoming all people. And in collaborative research, we often think of the science first and the people doing the science much later. And we want to change that and have us working in collaborative, effective teams as soon as possible. So we're posing the question, what if we had written DEI plans for our research projects, just like we have data collection protocols, written lab techniques, and data management plans? So we ask that each MEFA project develop a customized and revisable DEI plan for their team. And that can be appropriate for whatever size team, whatever composition team you have. And we do have some guidelines that we're working on to help projects do this work. We also want to focus a little bit on teaching. So how do we get more teaching-oriented faculty involved in macrosystems ecology? And we think the way to do this is to think about research that engages students. So we must find a way to engage our undergraduate students. We can think about data collection or analyzing data sets or building teaching modules that give the students a window into your research. But we'd like to invite you to work on that dimension as well. And then finally, community engagement is something we really want to do as appropriate to the project. Ecology is fundamentally a place-based discipline, and places have human communities with knowledge, concerns, and priorities about their environment. So we want to make sure we think about how the work we're doing in the community intersects with the humans that are there. And some ways of thinking about this might be, is collaboration or co-creation of the research plan a possibility? Is it possible to work on something the community is concerned with? And how will you share your research outcomes with the community? A scientific journal publication is not going to be always effective at reaching different members of your community. And we've got a community engagement roadmap that can give you some more ideas. So just to summarize, what we hope our projects will integrate are macrosystems ecology concepts, existing environmental data sets and data science, a DEIJ plan for collaboration, and student learning through authentic research, and if appropriate, local community concerns. And we have a figure here that's actually from our grant proposal that shows that we started, with Aaron's kind of collaborative multi-site experiments that were happening more locally, but linking across many local sites. And now we want to see if we can put that in a broader, more macro scale context and recognize connections that may happen with those local data sets across scales, even going up to the teleconnection at the global scale. Now, we recognize that this is going to be very hard. It requires time, it requires building and merging different kinds of expertise. It requires building relationships with individuals and communities. So we are not looking in this opportunity that we are publicizing to you all, we're not looking for a finished project to come to us on November 1. We're looking for ideas that we can support you in developing further. So your one-page proposal is really just the first step. The timeline that we're envisioning, I know this is a pretty wordy little slide, but I'm hoping that it lays out for you what we're thinking. So right now in fall 2024, the first thing is by November 1, we're looking for a one-page proposal that outlines your idea, describes how it touches on the 5 MEFA criteria. Note that community engagement is optional. That may not be something appropriate, like if you have a very data science heavy project where you're not actually going into the communities, maybe community engagement is not something you would focus on. But we'd like to hear about the criteria that I just outlined, and then also how your team engages with axes of diversity. In what ways does your team expand our scientific community? Does it have plans for outreach to different backgrounds or people from different perspectives? That can be something you talk about in your proposal as well. On December 6th, we'll let teams know that we've selected them, and MEFA will select up to 5 new teams. And at that point, we call the teams working on project development incubator projects. In spring of 2025, the new incubator project groups will work virtually on their project, and we'll have some virtual check-ins with the MEFA leadership team. We'll do the first one in January 2025 to help you all get started. We also have a number of written resources that will help you with some of the ideas that I've talked about. And we also have occasional virtual training events that you can join in. In July of 2025, we're going to have our 3rd annual meeting, which will be at my institution, Ohio Wesleyan University, in the town of Delaware, Ohio. And this will be a hybrid meeting where we will pay for 2 members of each project to come to the meeting site, but it will be hybrid. So basically, if you have a large team, all members of your team should be able to join virtually. And this is time for focused work on the project, further training in the 5 criteria. And eventually, we're hoping that your project would get to the point of submitting a MEFA project proposal that is up to 5 pages, and it basically describes how the project meets the 4 required MEFA components plus community engagement. And then you become kind of officially a MEFA project. And this is just a way to, give you a goal to reach for, and it's also to motivate progress on the project. The project is really the intellectual property of your own team. So we are basically here to help you do great things. And that's the plan. So that concludes my presentation. And I will